Oh, yes, we'll get started. Welcome to another of Medical Student Monday. We're here today to talk about the workforce issues in emergency medicine to medical students who are interested in going into EM or have recently matched into EM and wanted to chat about what the future holds and hear the perspective of some current residents. And so we have two currently matched medical students, myself and Leah, and then two current residents, Jenny and Haig, and I'll let everyone get started. And just to kind of open up the floor, we'll have you guys share where you're at and where you're going if you haven't gone to residency yet, and then why you got into emergency medicine.
Jenny, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I'll start. My name is Jenny. I'm a current third year and final year resident at Temple Hospital. I'm an emergency resident there. In a couple months, I'm staying on as an attending there as well. I went to medical school at Cooper Medical School of Rowan University.
Awesome. Leah, how about you?
So hi, I'm Leah. I'm graduating from the University of Miami's Miller School of Medicine in 2 weeks. So I'm a fourth year med student now, and I just matched at Yale New Haven Hospital.
Lauren, how about you?
I am Lauren. I'm a fourth year medical student at Loyola University Chicago, Stritch, and I matched at University of Illinois Chicago for residency. We'll be starting in the fall soon.
Awesome. And I'm Haig. I'm a third year out of 4 years at UCLA. And yeah, I have one more year. I don't have anywhere to go just yet. So I'm kind of in this boat with everyone here. Yeah, I'm president right now, but Lauren will be president in just a few days. And she'll kind of be taking over. Just to preface, this issue is a huge one for all of us, me included, and everyone on this panel. There isn't a single one of us that has lost sleep over this issue. This is a big deal for all of us. So I'm glad we're having this kind of panel to keep going. Since Lauren's going to be taking over as president, I'll let her lead the discussion, and she'll be kind of the face for RSA. So be accustomed to her because she's a really bold and very bright president-elect, and I'm super excited to see her carrying on the torch.
Thank you so much. And so to everyone that's here listening, we want to address your questions and your concerns. And we know that, like Haig said, there's a lot of uncertainty in the future of emergency medicine for every one of us. And if you're from M1 to M4, we hear that you have concerns and want to help you in that. So to start us off with a question while you guys are typing what you want to know about, let's talk about why we went into emergency medicine, and if we had known about the current workforce issues, would we have still chosen emergency medicine? And I will conclude this one, so I'll let everyone else start.
I can start with this one. So I chose EM kind of late, a little bit later in the game. I loved all of my rotations. I loved all the things that I did in the hospital. I mean, aside from the scut work, obviously, I loved all of the different specialties. And then when time came to choose, I realized the ER was my favorite place. I loved going to the emergency department to go see a patient for a consult for whatever service. So I chose to do my away rotations in emergency medicine. And as soon as I did it, I knew that I was in the right specialty. I had a lot of other thoughts beforehand. I was going to do cardiothoracic surgery, and I had a stint with clinical genetics. So I've been all over the place. But ultimately, I loved the ER, and I still love the ER. I personally think it's the best specialty. Obviously, I'm biased because I'm in it. But would I have chosen to do EM again, knowing the workforce issues? This is so difficult because this is like asking, would you do what you love, knowing that you might not actually get a job in it, versus would you do something you don't love, knowing that you probably will have a job in it? And it's crazy to even think that after all these years of training and student debt that we're at this place where we're I might not have a stable job, or I might not work where I want to work. It's crazy. And we'll get into a lot of those issues. People are saying, oh, why don't you just work in the middle of nowhere for the rest of your life? It's I didn't go into this to kind of work in the middle of nowhere. I want to work where my family is. I want to work in an actual emergency department in a major city. And it's crazy to think that that might not be an option for us. So I'll leave it there because we're going to dive into a lot of these issues. But would I do it again, knowing what I know now? I'd probably consider if there are other specialties that I would have been interested in, if that would be an alternative, to be completely honest. But if after considering all those things, I realized that the ER is where my passion is, I'd still do it. And I say the same for you guys. If you guys think that the emergency department is where you want to work for the rest of your life, then go into this. You're going to need to pick up like a crap ton of advocacy, and you're going to have to fight your way to fix this specialty because we are the next generation. And if you're just planning on just sitting idly by and doing nothing, then I don't think this is probably the right specialty for you.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what you just said. So I went into emergency medicine for the same reason. I enjoyed going down to the emergency department, but I also questioned if I'd be a good hospitalist, a good internist for a while. I still kind of question that to this day. I'm very detail oriented and I like internal medicine, but ultimately I wanted to be the doctor that I felt made the diagnosis most often, which was the emergency department. I think because I am someone who kind of wrestled between two specialties and could really see myself being happy in another one, if I had to look back now and say, would I do this again? I think I would have given it a lot more thought. You know, I'm very fortunate that I was hired by my hospital system, and I feel like right now I have the best of both worlds where I got to train in emergency medicine and become an attending in emergency medicine, but I'm not sure going forward that's going to be the case for all emergency medicine resident graduates. And I know for myself, there were other specialties I would have been really happy in. I just wanted to be a doctor, and I wanted to be a doctor in a hospital for patients. So I'm not sure I would have made this choice again, looking at our workforce projections, but right now I'm happy where I'm at.
So I had kind of a unique perspective where both of my parents are former emergency medicine nurses. And so I actually came into medical school saying anything but emergency medicine because I was very aware of the realities of the department. It's a physical job. It is an intense job. You work nights, you work holidays. And growing up, my family never celebrated Christmas on Christmas Day because my parents would be the nurses that would volunteer to work on Christmas for other families. So it was something that I actively tried to stay away from. And then I found that it really was the specialty that I loved the most. And I wound up working at a needle exchange, and that became a huge area that I was passionate about, where I realized I wanted to connect with patients that were having the worst day of their life and be with those patient populations that are a little more difficult to talk about, that other specialties might not necessarily have to engage with as often as we do. And I realized that I have a soft spot for those populations. So I feel like because I just matched into emergency medicine, I would choose it again, primarily because I pushed myself for the past 4 years to consider other things and to actively try to seek something else. And I still realize that I've seen myself the most in emergency medicine anyway. That being said, when I was making my rank list, I actively thought about what's it going to be like in 4 years. Like, I want to be at a place that was either hiring their own people or were finding jobs for people. I asked that question very often along the interview trail, like how many of your third years or fourth years have jobs at this point? What is the program doing to help them get jobs in this environment? And I think that that's something that we all will need to consider, like in the future, is not every program is is built the same. And so we have to think long-term, just like not all medical schools are built the same and not all backgrounds are the same, just like where you're going to be 5-10 years from now. So as long as you're entering the specialty eyes wide open, and this is something that you love, you can do it. It's going to be possible to do it, but we are going to have to maybe fight a little bit harder than we would have 10-15 years ago.
I agree with everything that's been said. And I went into medical school having done a year of scribing in an emergency department. I worked in an emergency department and a pediatric orthopedic office at the same time. So kind of saw the difference between like private practice and hospital medicine, and knew I wanted to be in the hospital. And I was pretty certain I wanted to be in the ER, but my family was like, you need to stay open-minded because the reputation of ER is not always received well across just the general public, because they just don't know that we are specialized and things like that. And so I went through all the clerkships and like literally loved everything, but was completely sold that emergency medicine was the only one that really made the most sense to me. And I, similarly to Leah, like felt like I was aware that it was going to be a more difficult thing to get into, but I feel like we've been up an uphill battle with medical school in general. I did not get in my first round of medical school and things like that, where it's just always been kind of difficult. And so approaching that with the challenge and knowing that it was something that I wanted to do no matter what and would work to try to find a job. And somebody mentioned in one of the questions we got submitted, we'll address this in a bit, but there are jobs, they're just not necessarily the preferred jobs, right? And then the prediction is that in the future, there's going to be much, much, much more limited jobs, including the rural jobs. Correct me if I'm wrong. Hi. Okay. Yeah. So, so there is a major increase in competition that's coming. And so this is why we're doing this. We need to be aware that it's a competitive field and it's only going to get more competitive.
And full disclosure too, the job market isn't good right now, even like it's not and I'm sure Jenny can attest to this. And I know like the senior residents in my like residency program didn't get the ideal jobs they necessarily had wanted. So it is tight. That's mostly due to COVID, but yeah, by the time you guys are done, the projections are that it's going to be a lot tighter. So yeah, you're totally right.
And going right off of that, somebody just sent us a question and asked, do you think fellowship training will become necessary to be competitive in applying for EM jobs in the future? Let's talk a little bit about fellowships and the current job market from your perspective, Jenny and Kai, who are closer to that.
So I hosted a young physician section, similar panel to this, where we asked this question to emergency department chairs, asking them if they felt like that was an added benefit. They pretty equivocally said they still don't think you'll need fellowship training, but they think it helps to have some kind of a niche. So whether that is a fellowship or whether that's like a specific niche that you somehow curated through either research or your personal time, they feel like that helps you, because if there's an emergency department looking for like an EMS director, for example, and you took 6 weeks to do extra training in wilderness and EMS medicine, that might help them. I don't know if they didn't really imply they thought it would be necessary. And I will say right now, at least, other of my co-residents got jobs. Many of them did. They weren't their ideal jobs often, but they got jobs in their city, and they weren't fellowship trained.
Yeah, I would say that I think right now you don't need a fellowship right now, is what I would say. I do worry though that in the few years to come, whether we're going to be like anesthesia, where you definitely need a fellowship in something in order to be competitive in the job market. And anesthesia is a great case study for us as EM, because they've seen the job market issues too. They've seen non-physician expansion, like the scope of practice issues. They've seen all of that stuff. And we're kind of just like following their footsteps, and we're not doing anything about it, unfortunately. Like we haven't been doing anything about it. We sounded the alarm a million times, but nothing's been done until like finally the other orgs are like, oh wait, guys, we have an issue. With regards to fellowships, I'm planning on doing one. I think it will give you a competitive advantage in the long run. The EM fellowships though aren't like IM or like anesthesia. A lot of them don't confer too much of a benefit. Unless you're doing ultrasound or critical care, EMS, like there's a lot of other fellowships that don't really do much for you. So I do caution those that like just assume that they're gonna, like be able to do a fellowship. The other thing too is like we're starting to see some of the fellowships, the utility kind of go down. Things like ultrasound, we're all being trained really well in ultrasound, so you don't really need to do a fellowship to have much more of a benefit. But hospitals like ultrasound directors and things like that. I think ultimately, we're going to expand into other markets like urgent care and observation units. Hospice is becoming a bigger thing out of EM. So pain management is slowly becoming more EM like heavy. So I think we'll have some room to expand, but I do wonder if those things are going to require fellowships too. I know hospital and palliative care does and all that, but I would say that I do see fellowships becoming a larger part of EM kind of careers going forward, versus before you could just be an ER doc and just go out and practice. It wasn't that difficult.
we've gotten some great follow-up questions based on what we've said. So let's see. For a follow-up directly of what you just said, Haig, that do you feel that things will level out after the pandemic is over? Why did you say that it'll only be tighter after COVID, and will things go to pre-COVID levels again?
It's not going to level out in terms of jobs, and that's what the ASAP study looked at too. They assuming the patient volumes are back to normal, because they've been kind of on the lower side and they're starting to creep back up to normal. We're still going to have like an overproduction of 9,000 EM physicians by 2030. I mean, you guys see it. When I was applying for residency spots, there weren't as many residencies as when you're applying right now. And then in 5 years, who knows how many residencies are going to open. So we've had 100 program increase in less than 10 years. 100 programs. We used to be a specialty with like 140 whatever programs in the early 2000s. Now we're at 273 or something was the last for this year. It's nuts. So
there were 4,000 applicants into EM this year, and there were only about 2,000 spots. So
what I do see happening though is stratification by program. I do think that we're going to see like, oh, you went to that program kind of a thing versus, but like right now it's like, oh, you did EM training, you went to an ACGME residence program. You're an ER doctor. You're great. You can be board certified, whatever. In a few years, I think we're going to be like, okay, did you go to a good program or did you go to a factory program? You know what I mean? Almost like medical schools kind of, like, did you go to a school that's just a diploma mill, or did you go to a great institution or whatever? Those are things too that, you have to worry about.
Right. Which again, just shows us, it reiterates the whole process we've been in this whole time. Medical school is very difficult to get into. Residency, very difficult to get into. Getting into jobs is just going to be the same way. This question is good. What allowed this expansion of residency programs to happen, and how can students do things to mitigate that while trying to also be competitive for residency?
Can I answer this one too? Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm like, I love this question. Thank you for asking. Guys, EM, look, the world of medicine is changing really quickly. It's becoming very corporate. It's really shitty. We're becoming factory workers, or we're becoming like Walmart employees in a giant Walmart. No one gives two shits that you're a doctor with an MD or DO behind your last name. What's happening is corporations that are traded on like public stock markets are sweeping up practices. So you have things like Team Health, Envision, things that are called CMGs. You should Google this. You should look up our resources on RSA. And you should look at what these are. The reason why we've had so many residencies explode is because giant for-profit entities that are not run by physicians have realized that, hey, you know what? Residents are really cheap labor. Hey, we can make a shit ton of money off of residents. Why don't we, instead of having a bunch of ER docs, open a residency program in this hospital? And so what do? They opened 100 in the last 10 years. So we've been used as a tool for seeing patients to make money for these giant corporations that are not run by physicians. And who's complicit in this? Everyone is complicit in this. All of our organizations, I want to say, aside from AAM and RSA, because we've actually like sounded the alarm, but maybe we could have done a better job of sounding the alarm. I don't know. But the other organizations haven't done anything to stop this at all. Like some of them haven't even talked about the fact that this is an issue. And now it's starting to come to light. So the biggest thing that you can do as a medical student, if you're deciding to get into EM, is like out of fear for antitrust, I'm not going to like blurt this out. I got to think of how I'm going to word this. Understand who's running your emergency residency program. Choose wisely. Let me say that just for legal like reasons. And then understand that if you go to a program that might not have your best interests in mind, that this program is causing some of the demise of our specialty. You have to understand that too. There are good programs, there are bad programs, there are good players in EM, there are bad players in EM. You have to understand where you are on this fight. The other thing too, if you're going to go into this, you have to start advocating. You have to start thinking about all the work you did and be like, you know what, do I want an NP or PA to replace me? Do I want, more factories to open up that are just pumping out ER doctors so that they could staff hospitals and make a shit ton of money off your back? You have to understand these things when you're picking your program. You have to understand, do you want a program with an NP or PA fellowship where they're advertising that these people could do the same thing that you could do? Do you want that? So That's what I would say. Luckily, I didn't go to a program that had any of those issues, and none of us have gone to those programs. And I advocate, and we can advocate against this stuff because of that. I honestly think that you should look into these issues, understand which program you want to go into, and make sure that it's a program that's ethically and morally in tune with our specialty. I'll leave it vague enough for that so that I don't get sued tomorrow for.
And before we wrap up, we'll give you resources to connect with RSA, specifically to get involved in advocacy and to find more information about these topics. Just to piggyback right off of that and broaden it to everyone, what advice do you have for M3s who have been set on EM this whole time and are currently reconsidering right before the application cycle? They're already applying to AWAYS, they planned their M4 year. Should they dual apply? What advice would you give them?
Jenny, why don't you handle this and then I'll piggyback.
Yeah, I guess I think you really have to know yourself as an applicant. I think you really have to know how badly you want this, what other things in your life you might be potentially willing to give up, whether that be living close by to your family, working full-time or part-time. Those are questions that only you can answer for yourself in terms of like how you see your future. But I think that those are real questions that I would suggest every single person think about before they decide to apply to emergency medicine right now. I would educate yourself on the topics that Haig just mentioned. So make sure you understand the difference between a democratic group and a group that's run by a contract management group. I would ask those questions to interviewers and consider dual applying if there's another specialty you'd be just as interested in. At the end of the day, I wouldn't be happier in another specialty by any means. I would still probably have chosen emergency medicine, but given it a lot more hard thinking. This specialty is unlike anything else. I think it's really special, and it's very hard to tell a student to stay away from it if this is what they really have their heart set on, because I understand that. I see those things too. I would just put a lot more consideration into alternative plans. I would think very carefully about how I would pay off my debt, because there is a possibility that you'll leave residency with not either being underemployed or unemployed. And I kind of have some like backup plans in my mind.
To piggyback on that, look, if I were in your shoes, I would really consider dual applying too. I hate to say that, like, these are tough things for us to even say, but in all honesty, like, you don't want to be in a position where you're going to go through 3 or 4 more years of training and then walk out with $300,000+ in debt and move to rural wherever to try to figure out how you're going to pay your stuff off. You already gave up most of your youth to do what you're doing. I would heavily consider dual applying to other specialties too. It sounds dramatic, but we're in that state right now. I think that's what I would do personally. I didn't even think of that as an option until like it was brought up, but this is a really shitty situation. And if we don't come up with answers to how to fix this problem soon, then, you're going to be dealt with the outcomes that are going to be left, So for those that are applying, for those that are becoming MS4s, I would broaden your horizons. It's almost like investments. Put multiple eggs in different baskets, whatever the saying is. Diversify your portfolio. And I don't know, like, I don't want this to come off doomsday, but 10,000 extra ER doctors is not a small amount. I think there's like 60,000 practicing in the US. 10,000 is not a small amount of ER doctors to kind of have an oversupply of. And look, the residencies aren't stopping. The ACGME hasn't decided they're going to stop opening new residencies. There's still residencies in the pipeline just waiting for certification. And there are applications coming in like who knows how often. That's what I would say.
Oh, a couple things I wanted to mention. One is if you're an MS3 that's like been dead set on EM, and this is the only thing you can imagine, like definitely still go through with doing the away rotations and make sure you have a very strong competitive application, because EM is unique in that you can't just, you can apply into internal medicine or specialties without very specific letters for that specialty, but EM is very specific that you need your SLO and you need to have a commitment to EM seen in your application. And that's something that students are evaluated on. So if you are dead set on EM and that's like what you want to do, still make sure you have a strong application for that. And it's not bad to apply into another specialty that you could see yourself in. Like, I think that's a great idea to just have as a backup plan at the end of the day. What's a few more dollars in application fees, especially because I'm pretty sure interviews are going to be virtual again this year. So if you are noticing once you're getting, and you don't know what's said in your SLO either. So you don't really know truly how strong or competitive of an applicant you are, because I know people who crushed board exams and then did terrible on their SLO and then didn't have the same sort of application that they were expecting to have when they were first or second year, thinking they would ball out on step one sort of deal. So if you go into it and you're getting interviews from very competitive places and you think you have a really good chance at matching at an amazing EM program that could potentially set you up for great job prospects in 4 years, even when the market's tight, then I still think that's a great idea. But if you're getting there and you're not having interviews at places and maybe only seeing those residencies that are kind of worker mills, essentially, that, you know, it might be very difficult to get a job after that residency, then maybe putting some of those other, like a very strong IM program or something that you interviewed at, higher on your rank list in that case. At the end of the day, no one sees your rank list and no one knows what, like, who you put first, second, or third, or what specialty you're actually applying to at the end of the day, if that's what you say. So hold your cards close if you need to, but there's no harm in dual applying. But if you're going to apply EM, do your best to be a competitive and strong applicant for emergency medicine. And like I had said before, go in with your eyes wide open, because some of my friends that didn't match into emergency medicine this year, I think some of it is they saw, oh, it's a lifestyle, it's shift work, I can still have all my hobbies and fun, but they didn't think about, you know, what it actually feels like to do chest compressions on a patient, or what it actually feels like to be running a code. And that's a different personality and a different type of skill set. And they didn't do as well in the match process because at the end of the day, they don't have that type of personality for emergency medicine. They would be better suited in another specialty. So you have to have a little bit of a self-awareness. And for some of the people, I saw a couple of comments of people asking what you can even do as a student now. We are going to give you resources and stuff. There's plenty of things you can be doing right now, like even letter writing campaigns. As a medical student, you are not helpless. But one of the things that I felt like that really helped me was being a part of AEM and just having that networking and those relationships. So definitely joining AEM is one step closer to actually fixing this.
Yeah, all great things. And I'll just reiterate a couple things. One thing I would say too, in terms of all of the doom and gloom, I'll be tiny bit devil's advocate here. I personally, again, could not have seen myself doing anything other than EM. And one of the things I considered was anesthesia. And so obviously the grass is not always greener in different specialties as well. And so I think you really do need to do the research and really look into what you want to do and where you want to live, and kind of figure out what your main life priorities are in this process. Because I think if you know who you are as a person and what you want out of residency and what you want as a job in the future, that is really going to be what drives where you go. It should have been what drove where you go, but really get into it for the right reasons. And then if you know that EM is right for you, get involved in things, get involved in RSA, get involved by finding a mentor in RSA, get connected and go to conferences, network. Because in the future, a lot of getting a job in general is who you know. That has always been a huge thing in any career. And so I think if you can really shape your resume and really get involved in committees and things and get to know the people who are actively making this change, that is a way that you can set yourself up for success in the future as well. And so take into consideration what we're saying. And if EM isn't for you, then try to find what is right. But if it is, and if dual applying is something you would never consider, that's fine. Just get involved in EM, figure out why EM is what is right for you, and help us change our specialty. And I've seen a lot of great questions also about ACGME and just how this happened and things like that. And so I think that this conversation is obviously not closing anytime soon. So we'll have lots more topics to discuss in terms of these issues, but I think right now we'll kind of focus a little bit more into the medical student themselves specifically. So what advice do you guys have? Yes, sorry. Yeah.
Just one line, just for background, the ACGME thing and sounding the alarm. AEM and RSA have been doing the sounding the alarm for a long time now. The ACGME has a lot of like antitrust issues because they've been sued before. When anesthesia had a similar issue, they got sued and it was a pretty large lawsuit. So they're like completely hands off this. They're like, it doesn't matter how many programs there are. There is no regulatory body on how many programs you can open. It's not about how many, it's about do they meet minimum requirements to produce EM physicians. So the question then becomes like, should we increase the standard? Should we raise the standards? That right now is a hot discussion amongst all of our specialty societies. I don't see much being done personally on what are these standards going to be. There's no consensus, which kind of sucks because we should be jumping on this like quickly. So that's why these are kind of a little shaky for us too. Like I would have expected us to have strict things as an entire specialty on what we're going to do to change things, but we're not there yet. So that's the background for all that stuff. But yeah, we could talk about like the whys and why do we get here. It'll like for hours later on. So Lauren, sorry about that. Carry on.
No, you're fine. I think it's great because I'm glad this is like an educational talk too, because I think people don't know how we got here and they don't know what to look for. And so I think that's super helpful. But yes, so what advice do you, Jenny and Haig, have for like the M4s who are just matching? And like, I know that we talked at the AAM thing that people have jumped ship or tried to change residencies. Like, what would you say? What is your advice for the incoming intern?
I would say, look, you're not in hot water just yet. You're in very warm water. You're not in hot water just yet. What you need to do is either find a way to change the specialty. Again, this is like a pitchfork moment for us where we all need to like rise up and be like, what the hell are we doing? And not like, you know what, I'm just going to see how things pan out. Like maybe I'll do a fellowship. It's not one of those moments. This is a drastic time for our specialty. We need to be involved in change. So I would start there because I personally feel like advocating takes a lot of the burnout out of you because you're channeling all that like frustration and anger into something that you could like devote towards change. And RSA has done a lot of things to help change our specialty. We've essentially shut down NPMPA fellowships. We've kind of like helped residents in dire circumstances where the residencies are closing. We've done a lot of things to kind of help, and you can be a part of that too. The other thing that I would do is look afterwards. If you don't get an ER job, you gotta understand that it's okay. There are other jobs out there too. I want you to kind of change the way you're thinking or change your mindset from, am I going to work in an ER to like, am I going to work in the city that I want? And consider jobs like urgent cares and things like that. There are jobs in urgent cares. There are jobs for critical care. There aren't as many fellowships for critical care as probably what the demand will be, but there are jobs out there. The pay might not be the same, the acuity might not be the same, but at the end of the day, like ER doctors tend to just work in urgent cares because it's a chiller life. Granted, it's not as much pay, but it's a much chiller life than working in the ER. So there are those options. It's not like you're going to graduate and then like done. You're going to be homeless and all your student debt is going to come after you. It's not going to be that bad. But again, we have to change our mindsets. We all went into EM kind of knowing that we might do some primary care in the ER. Now I think we need to be like, I might not work in an ER, but I'm going into EM. Which if you're comfortable with that mindset, then great, because you will find a job with that mindset. There are plenty of random medical jobs out there because there is overall a shortage of physicians. This is the right specialty to go through this, as weird as that sounds, because we're like a Swiss Army knife. You can work like, doing occupational health, chillest job in the world, making sure people don't have like ankle sprains and make like maybe half to 3/4 of what an ER doc makes. Or you can work in a full-on critical care unit and manage like the sickest of the sick and, do that for the rest of your life. I think by the time you guys are done with residency, we'll have options opened up. Like we'll pave our way through this. There's no way 10,000 ER docs are just going to be homeless or jobless. It's not possible. We will expand into other frontiers. Some people I know are going into direct primary care. I'm starting my own kind of direct primary care practice too on the side. And that's like it's a huge market in a lot of places that's opened up. So there's options out there.
Maybe you'll be yes.
I would echo a lot of what you just said. So I would go into this specialty recognizing you're going to have to advocate for yourself and for your specialty for sure. I'd consider making a niche for yourself early if there's something you're interested in. I would get my financials in order as best I could. I would try to pay off debts. I would be pretty cautious about really big spending items like cars and houses, just like you don't necessarily know what your employment status will be, and you might be underemployed. So I would try my best to get my financials in order, and then I'd be flexible. Like we were just saying, I agree. I think a lot of options are going to open up that we weren't expecting. Things like telehealth and urgent care, primary care opportunities. So I would be flexible in my education to myself. I would be learning more about managing hypertension or like basic primary care things that at one point we might have scoffed at when they came into the ED and said, let this be the primary care doctor's job. I think it's kind of time that we expand our wheelhouse a little bit and recognize that we might be needed in other parts of medicine, and that might be our job.
One of the things I had wanted to mention too is when you guys were talking earlier about advocacy and, PAs and NPs, one thing I had wanted to say is like this advocacy shouldn't just be for emergency medicine physicians to be a part of, or just being, getting involved in it if you're a student that's going into emergency medicine, because it should be focused specifically on the patients and the care that they deserve. And patients deserve to be seen by a physician when they come to an emergency department or when they go to their primary care provider. That should be a primary care physician. So that's something that regardless of if you're going into internal medicine, pediatrics, anything, that you can get involved with working to expose hospitals that are doing that and actually like educate patients on, the person calling themselves doctor, whatever, might not actually be an MD or a DO. It might be a DNP or something along those lines. So that education, just educating your family about that, is a really good first step. And like having them ask that question of who is writing their scripts. Is it a physician or is it a nurse practitioner or a PA? Because at the end of the day, like your family deserves to have a physician. And if there's such a physician shortage, why would there be so many doctors without jobs? So that's something that we can all get involved with at any level. So as an MS1, you can start educating people about that, start being involved in like the PPP or some other programs that are focused on giving the patients what they deserve and not making the argument, oh, we're going to be doctors without a job because PAs and NPs are taking our jobs, because no one feels bad for the physician like that. They think we're just attacking PAs and NPs. The argument really should be what is best for the patients. And at the end of the day,
that's such a good point, because we could theoretically fix the physician oversupply just by taking non-physicians out of the ER. Like literally if 32% of all patients are now seen by non-physicians. We put this in our position statement, if you don't mind like adding that into the chat, Madeline, I'm sure you probably have, but one of our points to fixing this issue, and we've had plenty of points to fix this issue. One of the 4 main points was we no longer need physician extenders. Why don't we start replacing our physician extenders who could go back to primary care where they're specialty trained and replace them back with physicians? We don't need extenders anymore. I got a lot of heat for it, obviously, from all of the major mid-level groups, but that's one of the things that we need to address too, is why are we, as the most trained, most capable providers, being replaced by non-physicians? And especially when there are so many of us that could staff these jobs, why are we still going to have to fight non-physicians that didn't go to medical school or didn't have any residency training for jobs in what we specialized in since we went into medical school? It's kind of nuts to me how corporate things are, but literally it's for cost saving measures. They'll bill at the same rate as physicians for a lot of the care provided by these people that take 1/3 of your salary, when the patients don't even know who the person under the white coat is. So these are things for you to advocate on. These are things to bring up to your programs too. It's like, why are there NPs and PAs in my residency doing central lines and A lines when I'm expected to not even find a job in the ER? Why are they being trained in something when I'm going to be the most trained in this specialty? So look, guys, like this is going to take a grassroots movement. I don't like shitting on other like specialty societies, but most of our other specialty societies are not doing much. They're very scared to talk about the corporate interests. A lot of them get a lot of funding from corporate entities to do their thing. Like if you go to ASAP or the EMRA parties, like you'll see all the Envision and Team Health banners. Like you'll know what I'm talking about. These people are not in your favor necessarily, especially the CMGs. So what we need to do is make sure that our voice is heard and say, look, like enough is enough. I trained in this to work in the emergency department. We don't need physician extension in the emergency department. I'm a physician that needs a job in the emergency department. Give me the job in the emergency department. It's simple. That's a huge fix. It's so easy to fix too. The other thing, of course, like the ACGME stuff and all that. The ACGME, like, it sucks to say, but I don't see much happening from their end at all. Even like we'll have like 9,000 EM residency programs, not even just physicians. We'll get to like 9,000 EM programs where there's one every other street, and they still wouldn't do anything. I feel like that's how bad things are. We've been in discussions with them. We had a letter that was signed by 1,500 ER doctors attendings. Like RSA sent this letter out to the ACGME. We got this like response that again basically said that they can't do much, or it's not their duty to do that or whatever. The things that you can do as medical students and incoming residents is to educate the people around you, educate your co-residents too. A lot of them don't know this issue. A lot of them are just marching in like with their like blinders on essentially. So, you got to make sure that everyone knows about this issue, especially the fact that, we have a good market that we could take over just by putting physicians back where physicians and extenders are. Yeah.
Yep. So many different venues to get involved in and advocate for, and so many different ideas too about how we can change kind of what's going on and what putting the ER doc back as the focus of the ER. There's been so many great questions, and I've already seen some of our panelists giving their emails out. So just know that we see that you're asking a million questions, and we understand that you have all of these different questions, and you're giving us a lot of different topics to cover in the future and help you address. And so I'm sorry, I'm just going to read to find the one that I was going to ask next. One things people were kind of talking about, to go back to this change in ER in the future and how we might expand into like other urgent cares and things like that. And one of the applicants said a lot of people, myself included, want to go into EM to work in an ER because they love that environment. They love that location, that place. And so what advice do you have for students who want the ER lifestyle? And if it's going to change that much, like if we're beyond choosing an ethical residency and a more competitive residency, like what else can you do? What advice do you guys have?
I would say that if you want to work in an ER, I think what's going to happen is if you want to work in an academic ER, you're going to end up needing a fellowship. I think that's where things are headed. If you want to work in a community ER, you got to figure out, like, are you going to be comfortable working in a CMG run, like a corporate run ER, because that's what like 50% of our staffing is now. 50% of ERs are like, or ER doctors are staffed by corporate entities that take like 20% of your paycheck and overbill patients. It turns out to be the same for your salary, but a lot of like unethical stuff happens. The other 50% work for small democratic groups, which are like little havens for where you become a partner, almost like lawyers become partners in their firm. You have your own medical firm. You do your own billing. Everything's transparent. It's under your name. So I think that the most competitive people are going to be able to work in those environments. People from schools that have a good alumni network are going to be able to work in those environments. It's not going to be just, like, oh, you just went to residency, you're done. I think we're going to start seeing some stratification there. So yeah, I think just like the pediatric hospitalist thing became a thing, like now pediatricians have to do a hospitalist fellowship, which is nuts to me. It's like an additional 2 to 3 years of fellowship just to work in a hospital. I think we might end up needing just a fellowship just to do the ER. And I don't think it's going to be like ER fellowship for the ER residency. I think it's going to just be like an academic fellowship, or you might need to do ultrasound or disaster training or EMS or whatever to kind of help add like a skill set to you.
I think for academics, in some academic institutions, that might be true. And I think you can already kind of get the sense of that by just looking at the training of the newer hires at those academic institutions. You could probably even ask that on interviews or just look that up on their website. I don't think that's the case though for all academic institutions, myself being like one of those examples. But I definitely agree with the sentiment that I think it's a little harder to say in the future that you'll definitely be able to find a job as a solely emergency department physician. It's definitely possible. And things might change. And I think it's possible that you'll be like a really good applicant and you'll find that like golden ticket to a Democratic group. But I just don't know if you can go into this with that kind of inflexibility right now, because I think our field is just changing a lot. And I don't know if we'll all be that lucky.
And it's tough to do even now. Like finding a good small Democratic group is tough to do even now. Like a lot of people are just signing up with random corporate groups because there aren't that many small Democratic groups. So that is true. And then, yeah, Jenny's like a golden resident, she's like a catch for all of Temple. So I don't think you can.
But I think what you're saying rings true, which is why I like to caution med students now just to like think really carefully about things, because it is really tough. You go into the specialty, of course, because you want to be an emergency physician. You want to work in an ED. You want to take care of critically ill patients. That's the reason we all went into this. It's such a tough pill to swallow, to have to give advice or to say like, I'm not so sure that's the future for us. I'm not sure that's the future for me.
And we do have to give a disclaimer that this is all speculative too. We're thinking essentially worst case because it looks like worst case, to be honest. But I don't know, maybe something will happen and a bunch of residencies will voluntarily close their doors.
Right. This is a reaction, though, to the ASAP workforce study, which gave us projections on our job market, which were really concerning. And I think that's sort of like the tone that's over us, right? This was a pretty large study, and we've been thinking about this for years over at AAM and RSA, but now the entire field of emergency medicine is talking about it. So I think it wouldn't be wise to go into this field with your eyes shut. I think you really have to think about these things carefully.
Totally.
Totally agreed. And I think if this is showing you that ER isn't for you, then maybe it wasn't for you, and I think that's okay. There's medicine is so broad and we need every type of physician to be able to like run medicine as a whole. And so if this is showing you that you're more interested in something else, then go for that. Like we would obviously love that everyone in ER would have jobs, but if you are really certain that this isn't for you, then I think this could be the wake-up call, things like that. So
and it's easy for us to just be like all happy-go-lucky and pretend like EM is the best specialty, everything is safe. I think we're all doing you guys a service knowing what we're seeing ahead. I just want to like throw that out there that like we're not trying to drive people away from EM. I would love people that want to do EM to stay in EM, but like we are scared for you almost as our like little siblings, like this is looking out for you from like what we know we're marching into. So just take it like that, because and if you want to do it, we're here to help every step of the way, obviously. So I'll just, that's what I just wanted to
just go into it educated in that way. Like recognize that you're going to be fighting a fight a little more than we thought we were going to have to when we applied.
One thing that I see as a really big positive in all of this, and partially why I'm really happy that we as a specialty are being very blunt and direct with medical students about this, is that EM, as we all know, is a relatively new specialty. So for a few years, there are people who are going to like maybe competitive surgical specialties or things were applying to EM as a backup. And now I think there will be less people doing that. And there will be less people who are like, oh yeah, I guess I could see myself in EM. I'll shoot my shot, whatever. I'm not really passionate about the field. All of those people that have been applying in the past, I don't see them applying as much in Match 2022. So like my idea and hope is that Match 2022 is going to be these, these applicants that are very passionate about emergency medicine, that are here for the right reasons and ready to make that change in our specialty. So like, yes, as doomsday as we're being, it's not to cut those good applicants that really, really do want to be emergency medicine physicians. It's to kind of give a warning to those who were thinking EM would be an easy backup or something like that.
Yes, agreed. I think that's going to be a positive for sure too. And I think we'll see increased involvement in shaping EM as a future. So because we're short on time and we only have an hour, we are saving the chat. And so we're going to address your guys' questions, and we're going to give you email resources as well to reach out personally. But for our panelists, as a final question, what can we do? What can medical students do to help with emergency medicine? If this is where their heart is, like, how can they make a difference?
I would say educate yourself on these issues, understand the business of medicine better, teach everyone around you, your family, your patients, your co-med students, about what's going on, because this could happen to their specialty, and you want your patients to understand what type of provider they're seeing, and so that they can understand that. I don't think people really do, and I think you need to advocate for yourself and say, I'm trained to this level for this reason. I spent all this money and all this time trying to learn, and you need to kind of educate every single person around you to advocate for yourself. Publish studies that show the benefit of being an emergency doctor or a doctor in general. Don't get depressed about this. Just have either a backup plan, or just be flexible. I mean, we go into emergency medicine as adaptable people. Continue to be adaptable and kind of go with the flow a little bit. That would be all of my advice.
I would say I love what you said, Jenny, because I think that's the foundation of what you need to do. The things that I would recommend are to don't put up with the bullshit. We're taught so often in medical school to just deal with whatever shit we're dealt with. Now is not the time for that anymore. We've shot ourselves in the foot. All this interprofessional training BS has led us to become just a team player, not the team leader. We've come into this spot giving up our rights every step of the way, and now we have corporate entities just milking us for money. We're if you're gonna go into EM, you have to have the fighting attitude. You have to have the attitude knowing that you're on an expedition to Antarctica in the 1800s, where you have no idea where this is gonna go. But if you do kind of help figure out the situation, then holy hell, you found your dream job, you did everything right. But if we just sit down and just sit idly by, this specialty is gonna go into disaster. It's on its way there if we don't fix it. So the main issues that we've outlined with our position statement, and that's the first step that I would take if I were you. I would look at the position statement that we put out, because it summarizes everything that we talked about here, and also what we need to do next. It includes kind of tackling the CMG issue. Why do we have corporate entities running our emergency programs? It tackles the ACGME issue. Why is the ACGME allowing for the unethical opening of residency programs in places that are already saturated? It tackles the nurse practitioner and PA issue. Why are we training our replacements? When they're coming out saying we're equal to physicians, we could do whatever physicians want. Why as physicians, as academicians, are we allowing them into our residency programs and taking central lines, A lines, intubations, crikes away from residents and giving it to these non-physicians that never even went to medical school? So tackles these issues. So read those things, come back to the table with the mindset of, if I'm going to join this, I'm going to fight, and then join the fight. Look, RSA's been a loud voice in EM. We've changed a lot of things. We've tackled major organizations and called them out. Things like the American Academy of Nurse Practitioners that has 230,000 members. There aren't enough ER doctors to have that many members. We've called out ASAP and EMRA for all of their corporate BS they do, the funding that they get from corporate entities, the fact that they don't say that CMGs are bad. They don't say it. They don't say that private equity is bad. They play these games still to this day, even after all this data, not even talking about how private equity and CMGs have led us to this point. We do that. Our money comes from membership dues. AAM's money comes from membership dues. We don't take a dime from anyone else. We don't take a dime from these private equity firms or corporate entities or anything. We sell books and stuff. That's where we make money on the side. So, and look, none of us are paid. I don't get any money for doing this. I've taken a huge hit. I know I'm blacklisted on every CMG in existence. I will never get hired by Team Health, even if there were no jobs and Team Health was the only one offering. And I knew that coming into this. We're bold because we're frustrated with all of this. So if you're ready to join that fight to kind of help change the specialty, I think this is the right place to do it. And I'd come back. We're going to have more meetings, because this is going to be a long battle. We can't tackle it all in 1 hour or 2 hours or a week or 2 weeks. This is going to take months of coming together and talking. And if you want to join a committee to actually have a say in how we should handle things, join a committee, join RSA and join a committee. And we can do this together. It's open to everyone. As long as you're on a track to become an MD or a DO, that's all that's required, no one else. And that's what we do.
One of the panelists had asked things that they can do in terms of letter writing and things like that. And that's something that I had gotten involved with. So one thing is yes, I've said this a million times, join AEM and RSA, and that will really help, because then you will have all the resources to get involved. But what I was doing was getting involved with state legislation, and I looked at a lot of the Physicians for Patient Protection, where they list out like, these are the states currently right now that have legislation on the table to give independent practice to PAs and NPs. And I would I've written to so many different people, and I'm in the state of Florida. So I've written to so many people in the state of Florida to be like, here, these are real things. I've encouraged my family to write, and as patients, and to say like, actually patients really would prefer to have a physician, or to advocate for things like having physician as a big name on the name badge, or advocating for people not being able to call themselves doctor in a hospital setting if they're not an MD or DO. So you can write to senators, to congressmen and women, just like we do for anything else that's passing as legislation. These are legislative things that are changing our specialty that we can fight against, and you can pick up the phone and call them 1,000,001 times a day and let them know how you feel about it. So that's something you could definitely be doing as an MS1.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much for being on the panel. And just to say it one more time, we would love to have you as members of AEM RSA. All of the info is in the chat. You can get involved in committees. We have an advocacy committee, which is probably the most applicable to this conversation, but there's tons of other committees as well. And find your niche in EM. If this is what you're going to do, reach out to us, and we'll look out for more podcasts or things like this. Look into the past ones we've recorded. They'll answer some of the questions you guys already posed in the chat as well. And thanks again to all the panelists. Thanks for being here tonight, and thanks for your participation, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming, everyone.